Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Talking Niagara. Good morning, Mike Cushman, and welcome to the show. So
Physical Mike.
we are May 28th, 2025, and you're on Talking Niagara, our talk show about local news for the Niagara region. Not just in this area, but things that impact us in this area. So welcome, everybody. Good morning, Dave. How are you?
Niagara, Ontario, Canada, and the world.
Yep, that's the one. All right. Okay. So anything special happened?
Not really. The King's speech was yesterday. I didn't watch it. I don't know if you did.
I did not. Angela did. She told me it was a good speech.
Well, there were certain things in there that the Indigenous folk liked. I guess the way in which the King addressed the nations of the different Indigenous people and recognized them. There is already controversy, although one group of Indigenous folk have not been granted an audience with the king. They have issues to deal with the king because it was the royal on behalf of the king that many of the treaties were signed, and of course we stuck them. You know, when we did the treaties, we actually turned our back on it, and I don't know. Look what happened. The Six Nations Treaty around the Grand River is supposed to be 6 miles on either side of the Grand. We stiffed them for that. You know, so basically, they did the same thing in the States. Actually, they made a legal document in the States. It was tricky, and they put a lot of fine print in it. And so when the different Native nations came to the government, says, "Hey, you said we could have let's say the Black Hills." Oh yeah. Well, you didn't read the fine print there.
Mm.
And well, we didn't have a lawyer present, and this is what you told us it said, so we signed it. And so that's the kind of trickery there.
And who knows what was actually said 300 years ago?
Yeah, well, in Canada's case, it was more around.
But even so,
you're talking treaties that were made in the 1880s, 1890s, because and we were lucky that we didn't have as much bloodshed, settler to native bloodshed as they did in parts of the United States.
Yeah.
But they still had lots of native to native bloodshed going on, which doesn't really get reported in our history very often, which is really a fascinating part of it too. But aside from all that, the King's speech was welcomed by many Indigenous groups, but not some groups not happy enough with what the King has said, and they want the King to try to live up to more towards the spirit of the treaties that were originally made.
When you say the King, you mean Canada, right?
Well, they want to appeal to the King because the King is here, and the King was the representative of Canada. We have a king. Whether we recognize that fact or not, we've got a king. I never recognize it. I don't think it's worth anything, but legally speaking, we have a king, and legally speaking, the ultimate decision making comes down to the king. Now, the king cannot make any decisions at all. It can obviously, because
he probably doesn't. That's why we have governments in place, because hey, you don't need the king to be making. King's got hard enough life as it is. Got to do all these opening ceremonies everywhere. Sorry, cynicism. all these opening ceremonies everywhere. He doesn't need to be governing as well.
Yeah, it's a tough job. Going on one's yacht from. Imagine going from opening up shopping malls one after the other, having to go there on one's private jet day after day. Work.
Yeah, I don't know that the King opens any shopping malls anymore.
I don't know, but there would be certain things like I can see the use of a titular head of state, and I think in Canada we should have actually the Indigenous groups vote a titular head of state. Like instead of having a king, we'd have a Grand Chief of Canada, and that person then would be a representative of Canada, a titular head of Canada that could do all that schmoozing. That has no power, but just has symbolic titular sort of shows that the origins of Canada. Remember, Canada was opened up mostly by French and Scottish people who united with the Indigenous people, and they're the ones that opened up most of North America.
And that presumably is why they've been celebrated as in Métis.
Yeah, the Métis. Actually, I was talking to Paul Lemire. He has Métis status, I guess, but he can trace his origins back to 1643.
Wow!
And they would be coming from France, of course. And of course, once you come from France, it was not unusual to find a native woman to marry. And a little later on, when the Scots started coming in and around Manitoba and stuff, they intermarried a lot with the Indigenous people. So when you get the Métis in Western Canada, you have a combination of half Indigenous and half Scottish or French. And particularly in the late 1600s, early 1700s, the Scottish.
Well, if you think about it, there's a logic to that, because most of the ships that came over in the early days would have been 90% men.
Of course, and that's one of the reasons why the Quebec people speak a language that is at least somewhat discernible to French in France today, because when there was all these men there, the king sent a pile of orphaned women of orphans that didn't have parents or whatever, sent them to New France, and they spoke a dialect that was very closer to Paris. So
yeah,
that's why the people of Quebec today speak of kind of a French that's still somewhat understandable to those in France. Prior to that, they were speaking Norman French, which would have been completely unintelligible to modern France today. But anyway, those are all very interesting little offshoots. But the King's Speech, Indigenous people seem to have been pleased. They feel like they're more part of the whole system right now. And Mike Cushman says, my wife's family were the Scottish that came to Manitoba and married the Métis. Yeah. Yeah. A very famous writer, Canadian writer called Maria Campbell. She wrote a book called Half Breed, and I read it, and it was the reading material, part of the reading material for a psychology course in Brock. And just about everybody read that book in those days, back in the mid 70s. So that's a very good book. Maria Campbell, her last name, of course, is Scottish, but she was a Métis, and she just gets some pretty interesting stuff in her book there. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to our news today. Okay, so very briefly, there's a free rabies vaccination clinic coming to St. Catharines. It's going to be in, where is it? St. Catharines is in Market Square. It's June 3rd, but from 11 till 3:30. So
Yeah,
just around the corner from where I am. So if you're in Market Square, give us a ring or wave through the window at me.
the problem I find with this is reactive, not proactive.
Yeah.
We find here that they have found incidences of rabies on the upswing.
Yeah.
And what also they find is so many people cannot afford their pets. So they have a dear pet that they love, but they don't have the money to protect the pet.
Yeah.
Veterinarian bills are outrageously high. And I'm not saying that vets shouldn't charge the kind of money they do, because they had to go to school and it takes a lot of money to run a thing. But one of the reasons why I don't have a pet is because the kind of money it costs, particularly in their final years. But if they get sick, the kind of money you got to put out. I mean, it's cost me thousands of dollars.
Well, you probably get a rabies shot.
Veterinary pets over the years. Now I don't want to incur those costs again.
Yeah. You know? Okay. So so Tuesday, 3rd of June at St. Catharines Market Square, between 11:30 and 3:30, and basically you can get your pets rabies shots for your pets. And it's important to note they've had a number of affected animals, include 1 bat, 1 cat, 6 skunks. So it can hit domestic animals as well.
Oh yes, and especially the most important part of this is it's free, and the reason it is free is because they're worried that rabies is going to take off again, because the average person cannot. Well, a lot of people who have pets cannot afford the rabies vaccination. Yeah, that's it. This used to happen yearly in the rural areas of Ontario, the poor rural areas. They used to have clinics every year come to towns like Simcoe and other places where they would have rabies clinics, where you would bring your animal, and you would get all your animals, and they would get your rabies vaccinations to keep the incidences of rabies down. They didn't even sometimes they'd only cost $10 or something like that. Sometimes they were for free. Yeah. And if you wanted to get a rabies back then, you wanted to get a rabies vaccination, it was $70. That I'm going back 10 or 15 years now. 15 years when I'm thinking now.
You know what it is today? I don't know.
I don't know, but 15 years ago it was $70 to get a rabies vaccination.
So still quite
some of the people in the countryside couldn't afford that. Yeah. So they either made it very cheap or for free, because it was in the public interest. Now we have it right here in the cities. They come and get your pet vaccinated for free.
Yeah.
Because it's in the public interest.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the public interest, because, here you go, put a lovely kitty, snap, and you got rabies, right?
Yeah. And that's, you got to watch out. You got a lot of feral cats out there. You get a little kitten, you want to pick it up. There was that incident, many years ago now, where there was a group of children, little children, all in a line. You know how they do when they come out of daycare, they all hold their hands or a rope.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lady behind and in front of the line. Well, they found a little kitten in the bushes, and they were kind of playing with it. Well, it turns out that the little kitten had rabies.
Yeah.
And they're just walking down the street, and there it is in the hedges there. Whoa, what's this little kitten? So somebody grabbed it, and somebody realized the thing was sick. They had it checked out. It had rabies. Good thing it didn't scratch any of the kids, but there you go.
Yeah.
And once you get rabies, it's a death sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
You only have a short period of time. I have a friend who had to get those stomach injections because he get bit by a rabid fox, and he had to get injections in his gut. But you don't have to get them in the gut anymore, apparently. But you might not be able to find the vaccine or the medicine that fast. So you got to jump on it right away. You got 24 to 48 hours before it's too late.
So basically, any animal bite, you should go report it.
Yeah.
Go check it, or
yeah,
go
if you
get
don't-
yourself checked out. I mean, not saying get yourself checked out is more important than reporting it.
yeah.
I'm not saying you don't report it, but just get yourself checked out. All right. Okay. So there's a in Pelham, they're talking about residential group homes for older adults, and this is being pitched by a couple of councillors, and they're basically saying it's not about money; it's about allowing the ensuring that the bylaws are in place to allow these types of facilities. What they're talking about is homes whereby they're small scale group homes, and the idea is that you have kind of maximum of 10 residents, fostering like a close-knit community where seniors cook, eat, and live together and kind of rely upon each other for self-support. And basically, if there's nursing, etc., needed, it keeps the cost down.
Sounds good on the surface, but it sounds like unless you're all related or very good friends, it ain't going to work.
Well, I think Mr. Simone will disagree with you.
Well, I think it's pie in the sky idealism. You want a bunch of different people to get into the same house and all cooperate. Okay. So who cleans the? It talks about a shared washroom. So you get 10 people in a shared washroom. No,
Yeah.
that ain't going to work. So you're going to have 2 or 3 if you have 10 people, particularly if they're older. They're going to need to visit their washroom more frequently, right? Now, who's going to who's going to clean the washroom? Who's going to clean the kitchen? Who's
Yeah.
going to do the cooking in the kitchen? Who's going to do the dishes?
Well, and
There's
worse,
always going to be a freeloader. There's always going to be a complainer.
yeah, and there's somebody like me. It's like, do not cook meat on my vegetarian pan. And I bought the pan, and it's got my name on the pan, so leave it alone.
Well, I've been in a couple of different boarded room in a couple of different places where I got a room, shared washroom, shared kitchen, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And what it does is it brings out the best in most people, so they clean up after themselves, take care of everything, that kind of thing. But all you need is one badass.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that causes problems. Most of the time, it's pretty good.
And this is
I'm talking about here when these were young. I was in a home with other young men, and everybody did what they were supposed to do. Just happened to have a good set of guys, but you get a bunch of older folk, right? What are you going to do? You got ones that have arthritis, ones that can't walk that good. Are you going to serve them the food? Are you going to get sick of doing that? You got Molly over there, and she's got a walker. She can't cook her own food. She's got a Depends, and she makes a mess in the washroom. And seriously,
well, I would imagine.
Do you really think that's going to work?
I would imagine they would have support staff. I don't know how this would work. Generally speaking, I think long-term care facilities, the large long-term care facilities, are A, a rip-off, and B, not good for the community. So I generally prefer to support this type of thing. But I understand your comments and reservations about it.
I'm familiar with the retirement home because my mother's in one, and everybody has their own little room. They have activities they could do together. There's things that could be improved in that. There could have more community. They could be smaller, maybe. They could be people could get to know each other a little bit better. But usually, when they get older, they kind of want company and they kind of don't want company. That kind of thing. I that sounds good the way they put these group homes, but unless you have a support staff that's Like
I think you have to have a support staff.
you're trying to cook for one another and a boarding. Yeah, you can do that kind of thing, but 10 people, one washroom, one kitchen, common rooms. Yeah, it can happen, but um, I just see trouble. But because you're always going to have the freeloader and all that. But if a smaller retirement homes like the one lady I interviewed, of course, I've lost her name in my data bank long ago. I interviewed her. She was from, I think, around Owen Sound or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted to give back to the community. So she decided she was going to make a sustainable retirement home for older women. And that's how she wanted to give back. Now, the thing had to produce its own money. So the old girls had to pay so much money to keep their rooms. And they had support staff. It was just a smaller retirement home instead of these big ones we see around here. It was just a smaller one. Yeah, that might work. Then you have a group of women, but there is a support staff there. There's people do the
Oh,
cooking,
there has to be a support
the
staff.
cleaning, people make the beds and that kind of thing. So the women would be in a smaller group. They probably get to know each other a little bit better, and that kind of thing. So, and it was sustainable. So the amount of money that the old girls paid was less than they would have to if they kept their homes, but it was also enough to sustain them and keep the place going. It wasn't a profit organization, but the woman made it very clear that these have to be sustainable. They have to be able to repair the roof and all the other stuff.
Yeah,
but it's kind of like almost like a condo development where you have a bank account where you accumulate money for emergencies and stuff like that out of what the people pay for their residency. So she figured it out how to do that, how to make something sustainable and not profit driven, and so she did. I think maybe something like that would be a good idea.
The self-sustaining model is always a better one anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. Niagara housing market is in a downward trend. It's gone down year on year. It's gone down 34%, 34.5% fewer homes were sold in Niagara this year than last year.
Yeah, now they're blaming Trump. I'm not so sure that's the case. Do you think
I'm
Trump
not so
had
sure
anything to
either.
do with this at all?
I think it has. I think maybe 5% of the market might be due to Trump, but we are a border town after all. Maybe people don't move here or don't sell their house because because the job they thought they might get across in the US doesn't become available.
I don't think anything of that had anything at all to do with it.
I think it's a 5% impact, if anything, that kind of thing. I'm not so sure about that. I think it's our general downturn in the economy. The Niagara economy is not doing well.
Yeah, it's a downturn in the economy. You could make the argument of the unsurety of the Niagara economy because they say that 70% of what we produce here goes to the States, and we need 54% of what we do make comes from the States. So we import 51% of our materials from the States, and whatever we make or produce, we send 71% of it back into the States. So there's this kind of a trade thing that's going on, and maybe that is the thing that is quieting the market here. I think is probably doing a correction. Basically, it's been houses have been overpriced for so long. They may be doing a correction now. Probably too. The prices were too high for the average person to buy them. Who's going to be able to buy them?
And
they're going to have to come down to match the market.
Yeah, and also salaries. I bet if you're looking at salaries, etc., in the Niagara region, they're that much lower on average than they are in other parts. So the houses would tend to be down. We had in 2022, we had a massive increase in price that was totally unsustainable.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. This is a ordinary correction. Now the housing price jumped because we had wave after wave of people coming in from Hogtown, right? We had people coming in from the GTA that saw that they were close enough to the GTA being here, and the houses were so much cheaper that they could sell their overpriced houses in Hogtown and buy homes here, which drove the prices up.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about that is, of course, you could have bought a house here, in like say 20, I don't know, 2005, let's say, for about $150,000, and by 2022, you got to that house, you could sell it for like 1.2 million or something.
Yeah. So basically, you can put your house on the market and sell it the next day, kind of thing, and that's been happening ever since 2008. Basically, after the market started to correct itself, we've had overinflated housing prices, but it got really out of hand around COVID times.
Yeah.
And I think it's just correcting myself. I think it's just like there's just not that many more people going to be able to come here and buy them. Also, our immigration is being reduced, so you have a lot less people coming into the country buying homes. I don't think that makes much of a difference, but it might make some of the difference. So basically what it's doing is just correcting itself. People have taken their homes off the market and hope that the price of houses will go back up.
Yeah.
When they take their houses off the market, and you have a surplus. Right now it's a buyer's market. So you have a surplus of homes out there. I've even seen a couple where I see new price on it. And when was the last time you saw that?
Yeah, basically the new price means you've taken it down by 30,000 or something.
Yeah. So basically that's
well, and the other way you get new prices and adjustments in the market, in the sale price, is how often do you see a place that's been on sale, it's been on Remax, and then the same house 3 months later is on Century 21, and then 3 months later it's on another site.
Yes. So and one of the problems, of course, is people have come and bought houses that were overpriced, in my view, and now they find that they can't sustain them, or they want to move into something else. They want to move into a cheaper home that wouldn't have been cheaper 10 years ago, but now it's cheaper, but they still want to sell their house for the amount of money that they bought it for.
Yeah.
Or with added profit. So you see a lot of houses just stay there. I know, because I went around looking at houses with somebody I know a little while ago, and it was like that. It was like they were unwilling to come down. And so people walked away, and those houses stayed on the market.
Yeah.
Because the people that bought the houses for an inflated price, and they hope to get close to that inflated price back again, and they're not getting it.
Well, again, though, the thing about that is that, I get it. If you bought a house, and let's say you bought a house for $1 million and you put up 200,000 in order to get that house, you want to get your $1 million back. But now, if your mortgage owed on it is not the 800,000, but now say, you've gone down by 50,000, let's say 750, maybe you can afford to put the price down by 50,000 because you've paid off a certain amount of the mortgage.
It says here there are now 6.4 months of inventory sitting on the market, which is up from 4 months in April 2024, and above the long run average of 3.2 months for this time of year. So it's twice as much as it would be normally.
Yeah.
And so the number of months in inventory is, according to the report, the number of months it would take to sell current inventories at the current rate of sales. So it's, if you expect to sell your house, it'll take you at least about 6.5 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't count on a quick sale. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, unless you're willing to bargain a bit.
Well, there are some people out there. There are companies out there, by the way, of course, that are ones that very much are, will buy your house off you for cash, right? But don't
But they
expect,
usually lowball it. Like,
yeah, I was going to
so
say,
if
don't
you
expect to
come
get
in
top
and
dollar.
you're desperate to you sell your house. These people know you are.
Yeah.
So you're behind. And to tell you the truth, they can go to the court records, and they can find out how much of a mortgage you have on your house.
Yeah.
You can
And
go to the court, you can go to the courthouse, and you can dig into the records, and you can find out how much your neighbor has left on the mortgage.
well, in fact, actually, you don't need court records. You need Equifax. That'll give you it.
Well, yeah,
And
but I remember being very shocked. I had an old house. It was built in 1913, but I didn't know exactly when it was built. So I went to 222 Division Street in Welland those times, and I looked into the records of the house that I had. It was very interesting. It had old letters in it. It had the records of my house were just very, very interesting. It showed old records and the loans that were put on it during the Depression and all that other stuff. I found out that it was built in 1913. There was a letter in there about the woman that was going to be marrying the guy that owned the house, Joseph Smith or John Smith, one of those two, and he and so on and so forth. And by accident, I grabbed my neighbors, and I saw how much money they had. They had made the mortgage for. It was right there in the records. And then I went to other ones in the city to see if I could see how much they had mortgaged their house for.
yeah,
and when they had done it.
You can get every record about houses and every security attachment that is on your house from online today.
Yeah. So basically, if you have somebody that's selling their house and you can look into the records and see that they might be hurting, you can lowball an offer, and they might have to take it because they're under financial strain, and you can find that out.
Yeah.
So anyway, but looks like the houses are correcting themselves. I don't know if they're going to go, if we're going to get a big bulge right now. We still have houses out there for sale that are still too much money for what you get. We'll see, and we have people who will resist selling their homes that they had bought for inflated prices until the sort of the market matches what they paid.
Yeah. Well, and there's a certain element of you got to get back what money you put into it, right? Even though you paid down the mortgage,
had to sell lower than what they bought it for back during I think it was the 80s explosion of market. We had a big explosion there, and then in the 90s, it went way down again, and people had to sell their houses for less than they bought them for.
Yeah. Right. Okay. RBC is saying that Canada's Indigenous-owned energy projects are economic reconciliation in action.
Yes, this is pretty interesting, and we just talked about the throne speech and how the Indigenous people, according when I was listening to the radio, there was Indigenous people talking there, chiefs, etc., who were very very happy the way in which the king had addressed the nations, the different nations, native nations, and how they would now become more a part of Canada and the development of Canada. And now we have this article that sort of reinforces that it looks very good, at least in the West, for in the meantime, for Indigenous people to really hit their stride here, particularly with LNG. liquefied natural gas and oil and stuff like that, but particularly with LNG, where we find the gas is found on treaty territory. The terminals will be built in treaty territory, etc. So it looks like and they're going to be the dominant shareholder. They're gonna own 50.1%.
Yeah, exactly. So in this example here, Cedar LNG is a partnership between the Haisla Nation, which owns 50.1% of the project, and Pembina Pipeline Corporation, which owns 49.9% of the project. So it is the case of the indigenous communities putting the money in for the benefit of the indigenous communities.
Well, obviously, it's going to be the money that's going to come up is going to come from the companies themselves. They're the ones that are going to have the capital. The Native Indians do not have the capital for that,
but they have the land.
They have the land. So this is going to be a partnership. Now, this is in quite a bit of contrast with. Remember, I said there was a group of natives that did not get an audience with the king as yet, but had issues with him. Part of the issues were that they made treaties with the crown so that they could continue to hunt and fish in their traditional ways and use the land that way. And they're very upset that the traditional ways of the natives were not protected. So their idea is to go back to those ways where the traditional hunting and fishing and ways and means in which the indigenous people of the North lived. That, of course, is not reasonable anymore. What we find instead is indigenous people looking to the future, seeing the wisdom of tying themselves to LNG and other industrial projects so that their people can be trained, their people can get steady employment, their people can get the money that's needed for cultural enhancements and the money they need for schools and even the money they need to keep their language alive. They're not going to get it otherwise. So they see the wisdom of this.
One of the first people I encountered when I came to Canada was an Indigenous guy who was actually CEO of an Indigenous-owned software company. Now, he produced software just the same sort of, it wasn't software for Indigenous people. It was software for anybody to use. But, hey, their whole crew was from Indigenous. From an Indigenous background. Good luck to them. Well done.
Yeah, you don't hear that story very often.
Yeah,
like I was last week. I was at the Six Nations Reserve. I was at the Iroquois Arena there, where I watched an excellent game of lacrosse between the Six Nation Chiefs and the Brantford Warriors. Now that is a very successful reserve. If you drive through there, you find large swaths of excellent farmland. I know the guy. I know a couple of millwrights that came out of there that I worked with. Most of the guys go into ironwork, so they're iron workers, and they're top-notch iron workers. So they've found an easy way in which to they've been able to sort of go into modern times. Although they get a bad rap when they steal trucks and strip them down in the reserve. But that sort of slowed down. They might get a bad rap too when they sell cheap cigarettes, that kind of thing. But all in all, it's more and more successful. And the people from that res seem to be much more successful than other reses. We hear about the terrible conditions of reservations all over Canada. If you find, because they're isolated, they don't know what to do with themselves, that traditional way of life, of course, is unsustainable now. So they don't have jobs, they don't have futures, and so they despair and they get into alcohol and drugs and
Well,
so
I think the one thing about this is that you're bringing a partnership which brings people in, building a partnership between a corporation that wants to employ people in the local area and a group of people that need employment. A perfect match, and they have the land and they have the rights and etc. etc. It's a perfect match.
it is. Is a chance for the indigenous people to find a way into the modern world and find sustainable income, sustainable resources, and
Yeah,
sustainable purpose,
yeah,
like the rest of us do. Like we all got to go to work and all that other stuff. But if you're in an isolated place in the treaty territory, and you don't have to go hunt buffalo anymore, or reindeer, or caribou, or fish in the streams, and all that's taken away from you, and your purpose in life is gone. And then all you do is have destitution. You live in shacks, and government gives you money, and that's just not good for the human soul. So I think they wisely said, in this particular case, of course, you said it's with Cedar LNG. And like I said, they have the controlling interest by 0.1%. So we'll see what happens there. So you can see that if you can get the indigenous people of these areas, you can get them involved in the pipelines, the operation of the pipelines, and all that, and get them the jobs. They can operate
yeah,
it.
yeah,
They have sustained income. They then can map their future better because they have sustained income.
yeah.
And they can make those decisions for their communities. And like I said, how do you sustain your native language if you don't have money to build a school, or somebody that has time is getting paid to do that? How do you keep your
Yeah.
culture going if you don't have money or impetus to do that?
Yep, yep.
And
Absolutely.
if your kids are all going to the city and not finding much of a future and getting more involved in dope and prostitution and all that, so it's, I mean, the indigenous story hasn't been a good one all in all in Canada, but this may be a way for the indigenous people to remain as a group, an independent group of people that have ways and means of maintaining that through
I think
these.
I think it's a positive thing. It's the right kind of. It sends the right kind of message. It's a partnership. It's a partnership that I think is right for Canada.
Yeah, we'll see how it works. If
Yeah,
the indigenous people give it the thumbs up, then that's what I'm looking for.
exactly.
But they have to be guided along. They have to have lawyers. They're going to have to, like,
Yeah.
not like the old days when they signed
Oh no,
treaties that they didn't know what the small print meant. They have to have
know what the damn
lawyers
treaty's
that
about.
on
Yeah,
their behalf. They're going to have to be on the board of directors. They're going to have to hire their own CEOs to put on that board of directors until they can take those positions themselves.
yeah. All right. Okay, and congratulations to them. All right, moving on. MPCA is limiting staff and board members' discretionary travel to the United States. And this is another one which is kind of like what we were talking about yesterday with the police doing the same. All right.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. This is exactly the same sort of thing. They're
Yeah.
restricting.
I'm expecting this a lot more, to be quite honest.
Well, like I said before, I'd like to know how much it cost in previous years for the police to go on these trips.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would also like to know what the NPC has spent on these trips to the south, these discretionary trips to the south. I'd like to know what they have spent on it in years past as well. It
Yeah.
seems to me I'm kind of of the feeling I'm skeptical of its worth for the money paid. These things are all said well and done, oh, we're going to go down to Albuquerque and, learn about how to keep a safe city. Well, yeah, you got to go down there. You're going to be spending time in a fancy hotel. You're going to be getting dinner. You're going to be going out. How much
Yeah,
your
yeah,
account? How much is this going to cost the region? Right? It was going to
and
cost
yeah,
plane fare. It's going to cost the region $10,000-$12,000 per person
and
to go
I
down.
always ask why couldn't such a conference also be held in Ottawa or London or somewhere else?
Do we really even need it? And why not? Why not be able to attend it on Zoom?
Well, that's another question entirely. Yeah. There's a lot more Zoom capability today. Mind you, the thing is about that is that my comment about Zoom when it comes to conferences and that is you might be able to see the keynote speeches, but what you don't get is the chatter amongst the delegates that you hear, when you go to such events.
Yes, that's true. But how much is it costing us?
Yeah,
And I want to know what the MPCA has spent on this in previous years.
yeah, that's a
Now,
fair
another
question.
thing in the article, it says they want to source anything they need done by Canadian companies now, whereas
Yeah,
before it didn't really matter. They were just going to be looking for who's the most convenient contractor, and quite often they just use the same ones they used before. But now they're going to source Canadian.
yeah, and that's a positive thing.
Yeah. And what happens is in cities and agencies like the NPCA, they get pretty lazy and they start using the same people they've
Yeah,
always used. I know this happened at the city. They were using the same contractors over and over again, and they were getting their bottles of liquor every year from the same contractor, and they were friends with that same contractor, and other contractors were
yeah,
complaining that they weren't getting a fair share at uh, the bid. So so that kind of thing happens. And now that they're shaking it up, they'll have to look for. Now they're pressed to find a Canadian bidder
yeah,
that will do it. These things will all come and go depending on the Trump factor here.
well,
He's going to keep threatening tariffs and all kinds of other things, and we got to play the game for a while anyway. We have to tighten our pull up our socks and go Canadian as much as we can in order to fight back. But that eventually will end, and we'll just go back to the most convenient contract. I'm sure.
and even the person who forwarded the motion at MPCA, Rob Foster, said of the motion that it's largely symbolic, right? So he doesn't expect it to last forever.
No, and it's symbolic because it's not going to make what he's suggesting there. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference on the bottom line.
Yeah,
By not going to the United States, it's just a symbolic thing. They're not going to be worried about the kind of money that they're missing out on the NPCA going there, and we're not going to be spending it that much less money anyway. It's very symbolic, but I still would like to see from the police, especially, but even from the NPCA, how much money has been spent.
yeah. Let's get some report back on this.
On these journeys down to the States.
Yeah. My concern more with the police, and I was thinking about this after our yesterday discussion. See, policing in the United States versus policing tactics in Canada differ because policing in the United States, they are much more aware that there's going to be guns in a violent or in a crowd situation or a potential situation that has potential for violence, whereas in Canada that's less likely.
Yeah, there's much more gun violence in the States.
Tactics.
Yeah, they have the States has they value life less than we do.
Yeah. And well, no, actually, I'm not saying.
Oh,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
That's your one word.
Yes and no, but we were talking yesterday about that vehicle attack in Liverpool, right?
Yeah.
That's more the thing that we have to look out for here in Canada, the vehicle attack.
Well, the laws, And actually, it was Neil Ferguson, who is a conservative historian in the United States. There, he's actually Scottish originally, but he's done most of his work in the universities of the United States. He expressly said that the gun thing, the Second Amendment, and the way they operate it shows the U.S. has less puts less value on human life than other democracies, because you can easily get a gun, and they know that will put more of their population at risk, and that's what happens. That's what they have. They have a lot more murders than we have here, even among the white population. So they have a lot more murders. They have a lot more mass gun shootings, but they're willing to do that because they, in his words, they have less value on humans compared to what humans can do. So they put less value on a human life and more on the ability of someone to have a gun.
Yeah,
everybody would be, a lot of people would be arguing with that, but I agree with it.
I think you're probably broadly right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, former PM John Chrétien missed a throne speech yesterday because he's been hospitalized for minor heart surgery.
Way to go, Chrétien. You could have given up your seat to someone who's more healthy. What's the matter with you? You think just because you're into your 90s and you got some ticker trouble that you know what? That's that's not good, man. You're gonna just have to clench your heart and get through it and then go to the hospital. Yeah, so the old guy had minor heart surgery years ago at the age of 73. He had quadruple bypass. This time they put a stent in his heart. So he's a pretty healthy, strong, robust man, but thanks to modern medicine, he's alive today, because obviously 50 years, if he was born 50 years earlier, they wouldn't have been able to do the quadruple bypass, and he probably would have succumbed to bad heart by now. But as it is, quadruple bypass saved his life, added at least 20 years to his life, and now they put a stent in it, and he's good to go for another little while.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see. It's good to see. I don't know too much about Chrétien and his policies because I haven't experienced them. But it's good to see an old, a former leader, still with us.
Well, the thing about Chrétien, he made a big mistake with the second referendum. The second referendum barely failed by 50,000 votes. And it wasn't until the people of Ontario and other provinces went to Quebec and demonstrated on behalf of staying in Quebec that made the difference. The government completely screwed that around badly. They were shocked how close it was, and they had put very little effort into trying to reverse that referendum. They were completely unprepared. And if it hadn't been for individuals going there and expressing sort of love for Quebec, that referendum would have gone through. That was the biggest mistake Chrétien did. He did not understand the gravity of that situation and almost lost Quebec. Oddly enough, him being a Quebecer. Now, the best thing about him was that he just refused completely to go to Iraq. He says, I don't see any weapons of mass destruction here at all. I don't see any reason why we should join the United States in going to Iraq. The United States put pressure on us to do that.
Yeah.
Now, we did go to Afghanistan, of course, because that was an attack on a NATO nation from Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. So, of course, we went there, but we were not going to go to Iraq. And Chrétien made it very clear that this was a scam. It didn't look good at all to him. And he was right. So that's
Yeah.
that's him on the
So
plus.
he was one of the few world leaders that didn't buy into this mass WMD thing. I never appreciated that, but thank you for informing me about that. I never knew that.
Yeah. And also, probably the brightest spot in Chrétien's government was Paul Martin. Paul Martin was his finance minister.
Yeah.
Paul Martin balanced the budget and was reducing the debt. And was reducing the debt very well, bringing down the money in the same way that that in when Clinton had done it in the United States, but we did it even better here, where we had reversed the deficit. We've been paying down our debt, and that continued until the financial crisis of 2008, when Harper had to start borrowing money again because of the financial crisis. But he kept it small. But then it just exploded beyond belief when Justin Trudeau got in there and said stuff like, well, the tax increases will pay for themselves, and just kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, which kind of ruined all that work that the Chrétien government had done, the Chrétien government and the Paul Martin government had done previously. They couldn't help themselves. They got a credit card and they couldn't keep it down.
Yeah, nice comparison there. Yeah, and actually, I've noticed that one of the things that Chrétien has been one of the people in the last election. He was interviewed a number of times and give his opinion about certain things.
Yeah, he's an international statesman. He's been there. He's been in Canadian politics from the 60s, at least from the 60s. He was one of the Quebec five intellectuals they used to talk about before Trudeau Sr. actually won a seat. There were Chrétien, Lévesque, Pierre Trudeau, and I forget the other two right now. They'll probably come to mind a little later. But there was the five Quebec intellectuals that people look to for the future of Quebec. Pierre Trudeau was one of them. Chrétien was one of them, who worked in the Pierre Trudeau government quite a bit.
Yeah.
And Lévesque was one of them, who's, of course, more radical-minded. And the other two, I can't remember offhand.
They'll come to you. They'll come to you.
Yeah, they're kind of in the ether right now, and I kind of can picture some of their names.
I couldn't, of course, answer that question, but they'll come to you.
Yeah.
No, and Chrétien right now is kind of very much the I guess he's the go-to guy almost for any political commentator who wants to kind of get a former prime minister's view. He's still treated with a lot of respect, both by politicians on both sides of the house.
Yes, well, he's earned that, hasn't he?
Yeah,
he's
has.
been in public service for most of his life.
Most of his life, yeah. 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 You're looking up the names, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Yeah. Wait, we can bring it up tomorrow. We're already past the 8 o'clock anyway, so.
Okay.
And I wasn't going to bring on to that last article that we've got. We're going to have to deal with that one tomorrow.
Okie doke. All right. Anyway, without further ado, I bid you adieu, everyone. Do not forget Gaza. That outrage continues to happen. The West is very slow, but at least they're doing something now. The Israeli lobby is kicking in big time, pointing their fingers at everybody, calling them, saying they're on the wrong side of the history, and calling them anti-Semites. And if they're Jews, they happen to Jews that
self-hating Jews, yes,
self-hating Jews.
Yeah, word that is, right?
So they kind of, there's nothing you could say. You just murdered 20 Palestinian children. You're an anti-Semite for even mentioning it. So
yeah.
So be very clear. This is a monstrous thing that's happening, and it's a terrible thing. An American who was part of the relief program that's there right now quit. It was a U.S. Marine, and he quit because he couldn't see this being anywhere near a humanitarian effort.
Yeah. All right.